Good evening, Bern, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi Lockdown Lecture Series, meeting number 70. Bern, it's a great delight to have you here once again on our Tuesday evenings, and it's a particular pleasure to see Dr. Douglas Nichol with us after his operation. And Doug, it's great to see you back with us, and thank you for the little insight into what happened to you, and that reminder to everyone to take the tablets after the operation. So Brian, listen to the advice from the good doctor. Can I remind you all, Brian, please keep your cameras on and a recognisable name within the screen. If you do have broadband and bandwidth challenges, please just drop me a message and put your camera off. Thank you so much. As ever, Brian, can I ask you to sign the virtual tile on our Facebook pages? That would be very much appreciated. Well, Brian, we've had over the past few weeks a few speakers from Firth of Scotland, and last week we had Brother Stuart Donaldson join us to talk about that painting in the Bard, and I wanted to try and keep the Scottish theme going this evening before we go on our overseas travels again. And it's a great pleasure to welcome back to the Lockdown Lecture Series Brother Iain McIntosh, past substitute Provincial Grand Master of Province of Forfarshire and the Right Worshipful Master of Lodge Discovery. As we all know, Brian, Iain is another one of the jewels in the Scottish Crafts Research Crown and has done a lot of work, and we're very much looking forward to hearing about the old Lodge at Dundee this evening. So, Brother McIntosh, the virtual floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for having me again. And if I could share the screen, Gordon.
You should be able to do that now, Iain.
Now, can you see anything?
You've not come up yet.
Anything yet?
Nope. I've made you a co-host as well, so that should help as well. And this is where his PowerPoint presentations got lost at the second circle after the brig, I think.
Anything yet?
No, you're still on just yourself, Iain. Brian, for those of you when we're waiting, if you go to your speaker view, you'll see the beautiful David Paris Craig panels behind Iain just now. This is always one of the challenges of technology, Brian. And for some of our overseas, Brian, Dundee and the province of Forfarshire, it's got its own wee language. It talks about ingenins and all, and pairs and circles, and maybe Iain will be able to give us an explanation for you later on.
Can we see Iain's panels, Gordon?
If you just go to a speaker view.
We're on speaker and we can see you because you're speaking.
Well, Iain needs to say something now for it to go back to him.
The clue's in the title, speaker view.
Yeah, so be quiet, Jim. I won't make you all suffer Jim Reeves's face there, Brian. I'll speak. Hopefully that'll change to me. How are you getting on, Iain?
Doing difficult, this. I used to get it before, all right.
Yeah, you should just hit the share screen button and it should go. Here we go. Yep, that's your coming on now. We can see a baby owl.
Baby owl.
Aye, or an owlet. Or a hoolet, as you would say up in Dundee. Dundee Mason's PowerPoint coming up now. Early craft and Freemasonry.
That it?
Yep, that's you. Great. Thank you, Iain.
Right, well, thank God for that. Yeah. Right, well, good evening. Can you hear me all right, brethren?
Yeah, we can, Iain.
Right. This is a story about the Lodge of Dundee. And I'm going right back to the earliest documentation of this. Now, when the story starts in the beginning of the 16th century, it has to be remembered that Dundee was a large town at that time. It was second in size to Edinburgh at the time. It was also a very important trading port. It traded with the Baltic, Scandinavia, and the Low Countries. And again, it was second in importance after Leith, the port of Edinburgh. So Dundee sort of ranks alongside the rest of the royal boroughs, which had operative Masonic lodges at that time, like Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Stirling. So this is the story. It's a sort of a Cinderella early lodge in Scotland, the Lodge of Dundee. So I'm going to start with this screen here, 1469. This is the royal proclamation that allowed the royal boroughs to set up incorporated trades within the borough. So the important place of craftsmen in the royal boroughs was recognised by the three estates of Scotland, 1469, when craft representatives were given a share in electing borough magistrates and civic officials. And there was a close connection between the royal boroughs and the craft incorporations that eventually started. Now, what were the royal boroughs in relation to Scotland and different from normal towns? These were boroughs that had been granted royal charters and gave them special privileges, especially in the export trade, the trading and marketing of goods within the borough. But there was a price to pay for this prestigious position of being a royal borough. You had to pay a share of all the taxes imposed by the king. The inhabitants of the royal boroughs who were called upon to pay the stent, and that was the local tax, were the burgesses, the full members of the town, and involved in the civic administration. So that was the provosts, the bailies, the councillors. They had to pay their share of the tax, but also pay for the privilege of being a burgess. Just like today, we have to pay for the privilege of being members of the Grand Lodge of Scotland or the provincial. You had to pay for the privilege. So when a group of craftsmen, merchants formed a private society for mutual protection in the borough, they are also trying to strengthen their position in the borough. Such groups approached the town council for recognition. And this was usually in the form of a seal of cause, a letter with the town seal attached. And this allowed the craft, whatever it was within the town, whether it was the hammermen, whether it was the weavers, the corners of that, to elect a deacon to formulate rules, to hold meetings, and to control the trade within the borough itself. And this is all binding on the members. The first recognition in Dundee was when the Gildry obtained recognition of the privileges in what is generally known as a merchant's letter. This was not a seal of cause, but it was something that set up the Gildry in 1515. Similar in the other towns that set up incorporated trades in that. So this is the structure that allowed all the crafts and trades within a borough to have meetings, elect deacons, and control the trade within the town. This is about the size of Dundee at the time. A large population for Scotland, 6,500, but very compact. Dundee's similar, it's still the same today, very compact town. But this is Dundee of about that period. Now, I've gone back into the earliest mentions of masons within Dundee. Dundee had a lot of stone buildings. It had various monasteries. It had the towns of the houses of the rich people, the local landowners, and others. So it was a lot of building work still in Dundee. So this is what's been extracted from a book called the Protocol Book. This was the transfer of property within the borough at the time. So the first mention, 18th of January, 1521. The 10th hour before noon, Alexander Lovell, Baillie of the borough, gave season to John Fernie Mason, burgess of the said borough. So he was a burgess on his own resignation of the land lying on the south of the Fluker Gate of the borough, out with the gates. So this is just a transaction of the building, but it mentions John Fernie Mason. The next one, 15th March, 1525, compared personally David Reed Mason, together with the prior and convent of the Friar Preachers of Dundee. So this is prior to the Reformation. From the feast of Easter next, when he enters until Martinmas, the winter next following, every day to labour at their work, for which he shall have each day that he labours 12 pence, excepting stormy days and festival days, for which he shall have 8 pence. And if he be 14 days continuously from the said work at other work, he shall have to pay 12 pence for the days. Payment of which fee by the said friars to the said David for his good work and residence, and blah, blah, blah. So this is Scots money, 12 pence Scots. The pound Scots in those days was a 12th of the English sterling. 23rd of September, 1526, there is entered in this book a note concerning the institution of the profession of carpenters, masons, architects, and painters. And that is mentioned in there. Further on, 26th of January, 1533 to 4, mention of George Boyce, a mason, who had discharged Alexander Dunn, his apprentice of all service or band of apprenticeship in all time coming, so he's free to labour as he is able with whoever he pleases him, for which he, Alexander, shall pay to the said George within a year and a day immediately following Easter next, 15 shillings at 1/2 year, and the same amount for the other half year, except the said Alexander shall labour the said George. So this is a young apprentice now being set free from his apprenticeship. 3rd of April, 1534, Donald Campbell, abbot of the monastery of Cooper. Now, I think this is actually Cooper Angus, up in Angus, passed to the presence of the masons of the work of the Hospital of Dundee, near the seatide, which James Rollock has in few firm. And this, again, is just the sort of transfer of property. So here we have a few documented instances of actual masons within the Royal Borough of Dundee. The Protocol Book. Now, it's very, when you go back into this sort of period, it's not English. It's either Old Scots or it's in Latin. So this is the Protocol Book that I took this from. On the right-hand side, you'll see the sort of writing you have to sort of negotiate when you're going this far back in time. Fortunately for this Protocol Book, the 1518 to 1525, some kind gentleman away back in the middle of the 19th century translated it from that language into readable English. So that's why we've been able to sort of get these extracts of mention of masons in Dundee of that time. The first mention of an operative lodge of operative masons, working masons in Dundee, appears in 1536. Again, it mentions this George Boyce in an indenture, and the earliest mention of an operative craft lodge of masons in Dundee. So this is it, the indenture, which gives all this information. It's in the archives at Dundee. You'll notice it interesting, it's got a sort of a serrated top there. This is where the term indenture comes from. In the days before photocopiers and any other way of producing copies, this document would have been twice the length. 2 exact copies of the text would be put on it, and it would be signed, and then it would be cut in this indent fashion at the top. One half to be kept by George Boyce, and this copy was kept in the city charter chest. So the text of this is about a contract with this George Boyce, operative mason, to work on the kirk work. There was only one church in Dundee at that time, and that was the big parish church of St. Mary. The particulars of his hours and holidays were specified. And in this text here, it's declared to be the same as the Ald Use and Constitute of Our Lady Lodge of Dundee. And the terms of his payment are likewise to be after the Ald Use of Our Lady Lodge. It shows that by this time, it was established by Freemasons. It was a lodge already working in the town at the time. And they, in this document, they were recognizing the rules for the working of the craft. This is the text translated into English. And he to keep his interest daily and hourly to his labour, foresaid at the same times and hours as the Ald Use and Constitute of the Lady Lodge of Dundee. So the Lady Lodge of Dundee, that's after the Virgin Mary, which is Saint Mary, the same name as the parish church of Dundee. Goes on to say, this is to say in summer, to commence work at 5 a.m. until 8 a.m., taking a half-hour break, and then to carry on until taking a break from 11:30 until 1:30. He's then to work until 4 p.m. before taking a half-hour break, and finally continuing until 7 p.m. During winter, when the light is so poor that you can't see, at 5 a.m. or 7 p.m., he shall begin work each day as soon as the light permits, and work until the light fails. To take no meal break or exercise as foresaid each year until All Hallows Day, and from them until the end of the following Our Lady Day, to have no dinner time or of exercise due to the shortness of the working day. The said George shall not perform any other work during these hours and days without the consent from the current Master of Works of the borough. And George shall also work all Lent evenings that are festival days until 4 p.m, except Christmas through Passion, Whitsun, and Assumption through Lady Day. And at these 4 evenings to work until 7 p.m, and all other evenings to work until the time of preaching. The said George shall have annually for his lifetime of his fee of £24 Scots, be paid by the Master of Works from our kirk and common funds, without delay or debate, every half quarter, as in the old practice of Our Lady Lodge. So in Scotland, this is the first mention of a lodge named after a patron saint, Our Lady, Virgin Mary, St. Mary. Other terms of the contract, it happens that George is asked, and the town agrees, that he may carry out work for the crown, or that of any other lord or gentleman, that when George is absent from the town work, he shall have no fee from the town. So he's not getting paid from the town, he get paid from the other people. If George is injured, falls ill for the space of 40 days, continually, his fee shall be paid during the period only and no longer. So he gets sick pay. George shall have an apprentice for 7 years. And as that apprenticeship finishes, to take on another apprentice, approved by the Master of Works, ensuring that he's not too young and that he shall not be paid during his first year, and thereafter for the remaining years, his apprentice shall be paid £10. This to be paid to George in the same way as paid himself. The apprentice is taken ill, the same conditions apply, so he gets sick pay as well. And there at the bottom, in witness of part of this indenture to remain with the Provost, Bailiffs and Council. George affixed his seal, signed by him, and to the remaining part by George. Also, the common seal of the borough, and it's signed by these various people: John Barry, who was a mason in Dundee, Rollocks, who were very important traders, trading with the continent at that time, James Wedderburn, the Bailey, John Gladstone. This is the ancestor of the future William Gladstone, who became Prime Minister in Victoria's time. So this is the origins of the Gladstone family in Dundee. So this is the earliest mention of a lodge structure in Scotland, and this has been mentioned by a very good Masonic writer, Mark C. Wallace, who studied at St Andrews. He says the agreement listed the terms of service and agreement and manifested the desires of the town council and Kirkmaster for boys to follow the traditions and customs of an already existing Lady Lodge of Dundee. Aside from the reference to a lodge in Aberdeen in 1544, the Lodge of Dundee is the only other medieval reference in Scotland that implicates a lodge structure in connection with a borough church. This is also the Reformation period, working up to it. It's happened differently to what happened in England with Henry VIII. We still had the desecration of the monasteries and church icons in 1543. There was 3 monasteries in Dundee and a Franciscan friary, and they were destroyed. It's also a time when one of the preachers, contemporary of John Knox, George Wishart, who was burnt at the stake at St Andrews by Cardinal Beaton. At this time, the Provost of Dundee is Robert Milne, and I'm going into the family of Milne later on. It's also a period of something called the Rough Wooing. This is when Henry VIII tried to persuade the Scots nation to the marriage of his young son Edward to the equally young Mary, Queen of Scots. Henry sent up an army to attack Edinburgh, but he also sent up a fleet of ships into the River Tay, as Dundee was the second most important town in the country at the time. Troops which occupied Broughty Castle, which is where my lodge is named after, and from Broughty Castle they could go up and burn and sack Dundee. By 1560, the Reformation was completed in Scotland. The Church of Scotland now presided. Although St Mary's Church, the great church of Dundee, was subjected to pillage and fire, the Mason Lodge, although probably looted and its valuables removed, seems to have escaped total destruction. It is mentioned in the Stent Roll of 1581. Item Anthony Halliburton is debt full yearly for ye Mason's Lodge, and ye few mail of 16 shillings. From the documented history of Dundee, from the charters and writs of Dundee, 1560, year of the final completion of the Reformation, we find this entry. There were no houses along the north side of the Lady Gate in front of the church, excepting its west end where stood the Mason Lodge, a building of considerable size. At the East Kirk style, which became Tally Street, there were 2 houses. Eastmost of these belonged to John Panton, officer, to whom the council had sold 8 feet additionally width, the hale length of his house, with the liberty to build thereon, with the annual fee of 1 shilling 4 pence, so making his ground the width of the Mason Lodge in the West End. Now, we don't see any mention of the Lady Lodge of Dundee now. Whether this is because of the Catholic connotation of the original lodge after the Virgin Mary, it is now just styled as the Mason Lodge in Dundee. Those of you who have been to Dundee You'll know in front of the city churches where the market crosses, and there's a taxi rank there. It is thought, if you see from this old map of Dundee, there was a string of houses along where the taxi rank is. And it's there that we think the Mason Lodge would have been very close to the great Church of St. Mary. Now, I'm going to sort of go to often a wee bit of tangent into a family that was heavily connected with Dundee in his early days, the Milne family. There's various sort of spellings in the old documents of either M-I-L-L or M-I-L-N or M-I-L-N. So there's various connotations. But these, the Milne family in the early days of the 16th, 17th century were Masons and Burgesses in Dundee. 5 generations of this family provided the master masons to the Crown of Scotland. They were appointing master masons to the Crown. Later generations became famous architects and builders, but their beginnings are in as Burgesses of Dundee. So I'm going to sort of talk about the Milne family and the connection with Dundee, with Perth, then with Edinburgh, and in Scotland in particular. So for 5 generations, this family provided the master masons to the Crown of Scotland. And I've starred them in this chart. John Milne, number 1, died before 1513, master mason to James III and James IV. Alexander Milne, abbot of Cambuskenneth, master of works to the bridge of Dunkeld, and the first president of the Court of Sessions. He was master mason to the Crown as well. His brother Robert Milne, and I've mentioned him already as a provost of Dundee of the 16th century. Thomas Milne died master mason to the Crown, Burgess of Dundee. John Milne, these are the ones stars are the ones I'm going to sort of really talk about. John Milne, born in Dundee, died 1621, master mason to the Crown of Scotland, Burgess of Dundee, built the Market Cross, and became master of Lodge Scone. He was followed by his son, John Milne, buried in Greyfriars, Perth, Burgess in Dundee. He was followed by his son, John Milne IV, master mason to Charles I and Charles II. So I'm going to go into each of these. So from Robert Milne, who was first treasurer of Dundee, then became provost of Dundee. Son of the original John Milne I, who was the first master mason of the Crown of Scotland, and brother to Alexander. He was provost of Dundee during the Reformation period. Milne was involved with warning George Wishart that Cardinal Beaton was after him when he visited the town during the plague. He warned Wishart to leave as he was pursued by the Cardinal, but Cardinal Beaton eventually caught up with him, took him to St Andrews and burnt him at the stake. So Robert Milne, purchased a big stone quarry in Kingoody in Bergowrie, just outside Dundee. Robert Milne, from this quarry, was providing stone for the building of the Royal Palace at Stirling Castle, also for Falkland Palace. In 1537, mention is made of Kingoody stone being transported by ship to Lindore's Haven up at Newborough for transport to Falkland. The building materials for use of the King's workmen were largely furnished by Robert Milne, Burgess and Provost of Dundee. Records show that in early years, stone from the quarry also went to the building of the steeple and parish church of Dundee and Castle Huntly outside Longforgan. It was a very strong stone. It was a bluish colour, very hard, durable, scarcely affected by the weather, able to take a fine polish, but very hard and difficult to chisel. Mention in the records of Dundee of wood shipped from Norway, or Norway, as it's mentioned there, and also Robert providing oak joists, oak timbers, and good stone quarry from Kingoody to be used for the stone pavement at Stirling Castle. So this would be transported up the River Tay from Coongoody up to Newborough and then on to the likes of Falkland, Stirling and everywhere else. It was also used for the Tower of the Tolbooth at Aberdeen. And it's said that many sundials at the Milnes built across Scotland during 1600 to 1640 came from Coongoody Quarry, including this sundial at the Palace of Holyrood House. The quarry was continuous until the 19th century and is now filled in. So there's Coongoody, right on the banks of the River Tay. Right behind it in the wooded area is the old quarry. So from there came an awful lot of stone to go to the royal palaces and other buildings throughout Scotland. That's why it looks nowadays, it's filled in and unused. So there's a connection with masonry, buildings and all that sort of thing. His son, John Milne, and I've numbered him number 2, he was involved in various works in Dundee, and he fashioned the Market Cross of Dundee, which is now in front of the old steeple. He afterwards moved up to Perth and settled there. And he was the builder of the first bridge over the River Tay at Perth, which was swept away in a flood in 1621. Fortunately, this John Milne didn't know about it because he died just before it was swept away. He is mentioned as the Master of Lodge Scone and Perth. And the legend goes that he was the one who entered King James VI as Freeman Mason and fellow craft at Scone and Perth. Died 1621, just before this bridge was swept away, and is buried in Greyfriars Churchyard in Perth. So this is what he fashioned, and it still exists in Dundee, the old Market Cross. Erected 1582, Market Gate near the old tool booth. So originally it was actually in front of what is where Boots the chemist is now, and then it was moved to the front of the churches. So that's what John Milne did. Now his son, John Milne III, followed his father as Master Mason to Scone and Perth. He then moved and settled in Dundee again, and he's mentioned in several works in the Lockett book, the Mason Trades of Dundee, as working on the turnpike stair on the steeple in 1643. He remained in the town and under his directions to redesign the fortifications of the town walls to the west, forming a ditch to be paid 8 marks weekly. The work was not done. In 1645, the Marquess of Montrose took possession of the church and he held the town as well and set fire to parts of it. This John Milne was also involved in a petition to get a seal of cause, a charter for the Dundee Mason trade to elect a deacon in 1628, which failed. Continuing with the Milne connection to Dundee as they moved out of Dundee towards Perth and then to Edinburgh, he was succeeded by John Milne IV, Master Mason, now to Charles I. He was then appointed Master Mason to Edinburgh at £100 Scots per year in 1637. He became Master of the Lodge of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel in 1636, designed the Tron Church, and he is mentioned as being with the Scottish Army at Newcastle in 1641, when the Scottish Army, this was during this Civil War period, and he was with the Lodge of Edinburgh at the time in Newcastle. Continued work at Heriot's, and in 1666 commenced the building of Panmure House at Milne. This is for Lord Panmure, the second son of the Earl of Dalhousie, who had large estates in Angus near Dundee. He died in 1667, aged 56, and buried in the Greyfriars Churchyard in Edinburgh. So that's the family of the Milnes who We all know about William Schaw and his contribution to the setting up of masonry in Scotland. But this family had a more important contribution to Scottish masonry in general and over a longer period. Now, I'm moving on to the next mention of the Masons in Dundee. This is in the Dundee City Chambers at the moment, framed. It's an interesting document, 1592, a charter from King James VI of Scotland. It's written in Latin, but this is the English text of it. Given by James VI, witness ye that we have given and granted, and by these our letters have given and granted liberty, freedom, and full power to all masons, wrights, slaters, and other craftsmen that work by square, rule, line, or compass under the art of geometry, who are dwelling and resident within the borough of Dundee. To elect and choose yearly at Michaelmas their own deacon of craft, to hold their courts and assemblies by themselves for good order in anything concerning their crafts similarly, and as freely in all respects and conditions as any other craft exerts within our borough of Edinburgh. Given under our Privy Seal at Holyrood House, 6th of March, 1592. This is the only document in Scotland that's it is a royal charter with regards to the Masons. As I said earlier, when any of the incorporated trades wanted to set up an organisation within the boroughs, they had to get a seal of cause issued by the provost, the magistrates, the bailies, and that. So this is interesting in the fact it is not a seal of cause; it's a royal charter. However, this seems to disappear from history. Because when the Masons once again applied for a seal of cause in 1628, this seems to have been totally and completely forgotten. From 1592 into the early part of the 17th century, there was an awful lot of plagues ravaging Scotland at the time. They had their pandemics then. So maybe it was just forgotten about. So this is the same period as when we have William Schaw organising the Mason trades, Mason lodges within Scotland. The difference between the Milnes, who were the master masons to the Crown of Scotland, William Schaw was appointed as Master of Works. So this is a court, a royal appointment. And he was to oversee the work and maintenance of the royal palaces and buildings. And he started bringing in the rules and regulations, masons to be obedient to the deacons, wardens, etc. Be faithful, honest, and diligent, not to take the work of other masons. To only take on 3 apprentices in their lifetime, each a 7-year apprentice. All masters see that all scaffolding and gangways are set securely and no damage occurs to any person employed. So health and safety in those days. To elect clerk as secretary, every fell craft to pay to the lodge £10 Scots for the banquet and 10 shillings for gloves for the masters. So this is the period, of William Schaw. In 1600, we find that the Lodge of Dundee was summoned to a convention of lodges at St Andrews, called by order of the Warden General. So that's William Schaw. It appears in the notes in the minutes of the Lodge of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel that body was charged to attend, as was also the lodge at St Andrews, the Masters of Dundee and Perth, and also a warrant to convene. Mentioned as sort of a territorial lodge. Whether this is linked to this royal charter that links in the masons, the wrights and slaters, sort of a building trade lodge, and as a territorial lodge, not just in Dundee, but throughout the locality. Early forms of territorial lodges rarely related in terms of apprenticeship, maintaining records for admittance of entered apprentice and fellcraft and for collecting funds. Then we come to the St. Clair of Roslyn charters, 1601 to 1628. This is when the craft masons are looking for a wealthy patron as to represent themselves at the royal court. In the second charter, 1628, the Lodge of Dundee is mentioned by Robert, represented by Robert Strachan, Master, also Andrew West, David White from Dundee. So they are mentioned, Lodge of Dundee mentioned in 1628, the Roslyn Chapels. A big event in Dundee. Now we're into the Civil War period, both affecting Scotland and England. When Scotland sided with the new King Charles II, Cromwell sent up a Roundhead army under the command of General Monk. One of the last places that they attacked and destroyed was Dundee, the last walled town left in Scotland. And Dundee was sacked in 1651. The last defenders of Dundee wooded themselves up in the staple of Dundee and were smoked out, and then they were executed as they surrendered. This was a great tragedy to Dundee at the time. It was the end of the sort of the golden period of Dundee as the second town in Scotland. But we find 8 years later, 1659, the Masons of Dundee finally get their charter to convene a body within the borough of Dundee. So the original one from 1592, forgotten. So in 1659, they're allowed to elect a deacon. The petitioners, John West, Andrew West, Thomas Norrie, John Mustard, John Young, and William Randall, all should enter themselves as burgesses and pay their dues. No cowens may be employed except for dry stone dykes, employed from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Also, in the Dundee City Archives is this scroll. It's 4 sheets of paper all gummed together. And this is the earliest copy of the old charges that exist in Scotland. In it is the legendary history of the Operative Masons concerning Noah the Flood, the 2 pillars, Nimrod, Euclid, David, Solomon, and the 7 liberal arts and sciences, and the importance of geometry. This charter, this scroll is in Dundee. Now, I don't know if you can see actually the writing there, but it's very difficult. It's in what's called secretarial Scots. Very difficult to read. And it took a long time for this to be translated. The first 2 chapters, and there's 21 chapters, we'll find this is written. I'll let you read it, brethren, because I'm starting to lose my voice here. So this is the first 2 paragraphs of the charges. The Father of heaven, with the wisdom of the glorious Son, through the grace and goodness of the Holy Ghost, 3 persons and 1 God, be with us at our beginning and give us grace so that govern us here in our lives, that we come to his bliss that never shall have ending. Amen. Thereon. Talks about the 7 liberal arts and sciences. Grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, geometry, arithmetic, and that on. So here in Dundee, and we can date it to 1659 because the first chapter is also mentioned in the Locket Book of the Masons of Dundee. So we can date this to 1659. For many, many years, nobody knew what this document was because nobody had translated it. It was translated by Professor Wallace MacLeod of the University of Toronto. He found that this old charges existed. He was doing a lot of research into the old charges right across Britain. He asked for photocopies and he translated this whole old charges. And that's a letter from Professor Wallace MacLeod in 1985 after he translated everything. And that gives the story of Wallace MacLeod. He was a Freemason and a very educated man. And it's because of him that we now know what that old charges are all about. And it is one of the earliest copies in Scotland. Now, I'm going to turn to a lot of the documented history of the now what we call the Lodge of Dundee, 1659. This is contained in a book in the Dundee City Archives. It's called the Masters and Journeyman book. It's from 1659 to 1730. The first page mentions the Lodge of Dundee. John West is master of the lodge. Andrew West is warden. And this is the first page, which sort of fully documents this application to get a charter, a seal of cause from the council to establish meetings in Dundee, appoint deacons, and it's signed at the bottom there by those who were present, and they all attached their marks. If I sort of blow this up, they drew their marks alongside the signatures. Only a minute in the book referring to the Lodge of Dundee. The rest of the minutes refer to the mason trade. So we've got a sort of a sort of mix, a blending between the operative trade and the Lodge of Dundee. So here we have all the signatures, and alongside they have their mason's marks. Other documents in Dundee, 1674, in this book, showing the names of the people, plus alongside their names, their mason's marks. 1660, 1674. Entries in the book. 29th of November 1660, Wilt Day, the masters and freemen of the mason craft of Dundee have made and ordained Walter Robertson to be a master and freeman within this borough and all privileges. 1673, John Adam, present prentice to John West and entered prentice in this lodge by consent of all the brethren, Walter Robertson being present deacon. Upon the same day, George Wardroper, present prentice to Andrew West, was made and entered prentice in this lodge by consent of all the brethren. 12th of April 1684, he admitted the first non-operative. What day we mass and freemen borough of Dundee being met together have entered and admitted Captain Andrew Smeaton to all our privileges as free as we ourselves. The minute was signed by 6 persons. So here we see the start of the lodge that was once all operative masons, now beginning to admit non-operatives. There's a very interesting artifact in the archive. Nobody knows a thing about this or where it comes from. It's in the Mason trade box. It's about 6 inches by about 4 inches. It has the Masonic symbols on it. You can see it there. The star, the sun, the square, the level, and all the various other things. At the bottom, the date, 1521. Nobody, it hasn't been dated. We don't know where this comes from. It appears in the inventory in the Mason stuff of Dundee. And there's a sort of big debate going on about this artifact. We don't think it dates to 1521. We think it's more of 17th, 18th century. But it's an intriguing artifact that is very enigmatic in the Masonic archives of Dundee. From the Boxmaster's account, again, we see sort of this interesting thing about people talking about apprentices, and then they become free entered apprentices. As in the previous entries that I've mentioned, we have this sort of terminology. A man who's also already an apprentice to a master, now being made an entered apprentice. So whether there's this Masonic organization behind the operative trade. 1724, late collector of the Gildry, received from Andrew Smart, deacon to the Masons, in the borough of £6. So in the early 18th century, we start seeing the operatives now admitting those who are not working Masons. 1735, proceeded to elect a master wardens and other proper offices of this lodge, elected the Honourable John Lord Colville to be master. Alex Watson, senior warden. Alex Watson was a councillor in Dundee at the time. John Wedderburn as junior warden. Henry Ogilvie, jewel keeper. Thomas Crichton, surgeon, apothecary, sword bearer. So we see men who are not operative Masons now becoming office bearers in the Lodge of Dundee. Said they admitted Alexander Blair of something. A. Abercrombie, fellow crafts, and John Watson. A. Abercrombie was the ship's captain. John Watson, surgeon of the Earl of Somerdy, and formerly a member of the Lodge. And he was a member of one of the regiments of foot. The master to appoint a committee for inspecting Alex Kingman, a former Boxmaster, his accounts, and likewise to nominate a committee of the operatives to inspect the mason work within the borough, liberties thereof, and the names of the act made therein and signed. So here in this, we see that those who are not operative Masons but are of the nobility, merchant class, now beginning to sort of inspect and control the operative Masons in Dundee. So here's the 1735 minute, where the master is John Master of Grey. There's also Lord Colville. Ballandine, that's that's Wedderburn of Ballandine. Dr. George Colville, Thomas Blair of Glasgow. Lundy, that's the Alexander Duncans of Lundy. Captain James Abercrombie, Samuel Lown, Peter Achterlody. So here we see now the nobility, landed gentry, the merchants of Dundee now coming into the Lodge of Dundee. 1736, the formation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Lodge of Dundee was represented by John Young, deputy master for the then master, the Earl of Hume. The Earl of Hume was of the Douglas family. The Douglas family owned large lands just outside Dundee. I'm in the area that's called Douglas in Dundee, and that was named after the Douglas family because he had lots of land around here. Now we move into the Jacobite period, where there's big upheaval within Dundee, and the activities of the lodges at that time stopped. Dundee was very much divided, with some members of the lodges were active Jacobites, others were active Hanoverians. So after the Culloden in 1746, we find no lodge activity in Dundee and Angus until things had settled down. 1745, now something happened with the Lodge of Dundee between 1741 and 1745. It totally disappears as the Lodge of Dundee. Whether it was because of religious or political infighting, it just disappears off the scene. And we find that two different lodges are appearing in Dundee at the time, Operative and Ancient. Operative Charter 6th of February 1745, with the names, we only have the names of the Master, the Wardens and the Treasurer Secretary on the Charter, and they're described as operative masons. Whereas Lodge Ancient, the other lodge, George Kirkcaldy, Peter Smith, George Patillo, James Iain. Patillo was an ensign in Ogilvy's regiment on the Jacobite side. And there's also evidence that some members of this lodge were active Jacobites. So whether we see the sort of separation between Hanoverians and Jacobites or operatives and speculatives, we just don't know. In the records at Grand Lodge, there's a document with subscribing members to a lodge called Dundee Kilwinning. Now, this is the only mention of Lodge Dundee Kilwinning. So whether this is the rump of what was left of the Lodge of Dundee as it disintegrated. A list of names, a lot of members who are the local landed gentry, the merchant class, the hierarchy of Dundee. Those in red are identified Jacobites. Of the 47 names in this document, half are recognized as involved in the Jacobite side. So all these in red are identified Jacobites. So whether this is what we see with the disintegration of the Lodge of Dundee, 1741 to 1745, is a good question. So the documentary evidence of an operative Mason lodge structure in Dundee is there from 1536 through the 16th to the late 18th centuries. Then after the upheavals of the Civil War, documents and minutes from 1659, along with the original copy of the old charges, indicate some sort of evolution from the late 17th century and the early 18th century of a form of a modern lodge of speculative Masonic lodge in Dundee. There's the records of the Lodge of Dundee up to about 1743 from 1659. So something happened and the original lodge, which dates, we see fragments of it right back to 1536, seems to have fragmented into factions. Political, local differences, Jacobite, Hanoverian loyalties, which brought an end to the Lodge of Dundee. But Masonry, Freemasonry continued in Dundee after the Troubles of 45, 46. And as its children became the Operative Mason Lodge of Dundee, the Ancient Lodge of Dundee, and Freemasonry kick-started really with the formation of the Lodge St. David, 78 in Dundee. So the timeline history of Masonry in Dundee, from the Lady Lodge of Dundee, the Almason Lodge of Dundee, the Lodge of Dundee, proves that Dundee can match the Masonic history of Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Stirling, and even Kilwinning itself, and the overall history of Scottish operative and then speculative Freemasonry in Scotland. And that, brethren, is the story of the timeline of an operative Mason lodge in Dundee from 1536 right up to the end of the Jacobite period, 1745. I apologise for my throat. It was beginning to go, brethren, but I hope you understood all that. Thank you.
Brother Iain McIntosh, once again, on behalf of the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our visitors here this evening at the lockdown lectures, can I thank you, sir, for a very educational journey through nearly 4 centuries of history of operative and speculative masonry in Dundee. Iain, your research abilities are well renowned, not just in the local area, but across Scotland and wider afield. And we thank you for that, what you've shared with us this evening. For the Bern and Fife, there's some really nice points to note, and we can talk about them later on the Facebook Bern, because it's good to see that Iain makes mention of Falkland and the Falkland Statutes. And I remember a cheeky young substitute provincial Grand Master at a previous installation in Fife and Kinross telling what is now a past provincial Grand Master of Edinburgh that the cradle of masonry is actually within the Kingdom of Fife and not allegedly in Edinburgh or Kilwinning. And I think, Iain, you've got a good argument there as well. There are some questions in the chat for you, Iain, and I'll stop waffling and I'll find them.
I'd just like to apologise for my throat. I have COPD and sometimes this begins to take me over.
Iain, you have got nothing to apologise at all for, sir. Yes, Ian Anderson, there is the voice-activated text at the bottom of the screen. I was having a hard time seeing some of the Dundee accent. So Dr. Douglas, greetings Ian, the exchange rate Scottish to English didn't reach 12 to 1 until the 1570s. In 1514, the exchange rate was around 4 to 1. Scots groat of James V was a quarter of 16 pence, whereas an English groat
1 and 4 pence.
Sorry. 1 and 4 pence. I'm young. I'm young, Douglas.
I met was 13 and 4 pence.
Exchange rate. It's something I've looked into. It's because of an interest of mine, and the Scottish basically it started off equal. Up a penny Scots was a penny English up until the time of David II, when the English had a great idea to set an exchange rate of 4 Scottish pennies to 3 English pennies, and that set about inflation, and it went on, up to about 1500. It was maybe 3 to 1, 4 to 1. And then about the 1560s and 1570s, there was a rampant inflation that took it from, something like 5 to 1, 4 or 5 to 1 to 12 to 1 by, I think it was about 1590. And so, but I noticed a few references to amounts there. I mean, I did mention there was something, 1 and 4 pence was mentioned, 1 shilling and 4 pence was mentioned later on, which is a Scottish groat in the 1500s. English groat was 4 pence and the Scottish groat was 1 and 4 pence because it was 4 to 1.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
Sorry, I can waffle on.
No. It all adds to the daily advancement that we're here to make. George Donnelly comments, if John Milne IV was at Newcastle with the Scottish Army in 1641 and he was a member of Number 1, he probably witnessed Sir Robert Murray being initiated.
He did indeed. Yes. He was there at the same time. His name is listed as the members of the Lodge of Edinburgh who were there when Robert Murray was initiated at Newcastle. It's in the published history of the Lodge of Edinburgh, Number 1. He was there. He was a past master of the Lodge of Edinburgh at the time. Notes from the list of past masters. But yes, he was there. Okay. And Sir Robert Murray was entered.
Thank you, Iain. Ron Mann asks, could the date be the 1st of May 1621 or 1721 on your little piece of metalware?
No, it's 1521.
It was quite clear it was 1521, yeah.
Yeah.
Ken Wallace comments, an excellent and well-researched presentation. Many thanks, Iain. Archie Chalmers, another well-researched and excellently presented talk on early Freemasonry in Scotland. Well done, Iain. I look forward to your next presentation. Slider, most interesting, Iain. Superb talk and very informative. Thank you, Dick and Sandbach. Eagle, excellent presentation. Duncan Mulholland, well-researched and informative presentation, Iain. Stuart Donaldson, absolutely outstanding, thoroughly enjoyable, and well done, Iain. Well done, Iain. Billy Donaldson. King Ian Waugh comments, congratulations and thank you, Iain, excellent lecture. And the first one I've seen with subtitles, some which were quite humorous, e.g. the lethal port of Edinburgh. Well, if you've ever been to Leith, you know it's lethal.
I'm sure you see that on the TV when you put on the subtitles. It never comes up with the right words.
No, Ian Kennedy says the North Koreans also got a mention. So
right.
I don't know where the North Koreans and Dundee come in about, but I'm sure there'll be some connection there.
They won me there at
Iain, once again, thank you so much. There was lots of bits and pieces that I'm going to pull out and put out onto the Facebook page, but I think your mention of Mark C. Wallace, his recent book, The Great Transformation. If anybody is interested in this period of time of Scottish Freemasonry, Brian, I would heartily recommend it, and I will put up a link to Mark Wallace's book later this evening. And also the Falkland Statutes, Brian, from the building of Falkland Palace here in the Kingdom of Fife. Again, it's interesting to find out more about them, because everyone knows about the Schaw statutes, but the Falkland statutes don't seem to get a mention. So, Iain, thank you once again, sir, on behalf of all the members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi and our visitors here this evening.
Yeah, once again, I apologise for my throat. As I say, I've got COPD and it starts breaking down after a while.
None needed. You can get a wee dram and watch the first semi-final that's just kicked off, Iain. Brian, next week, some of you may be aware that it's the 80th anniversary of the start of the French resistance movement in the Second World War. And we will be having our brother coming from the US to speak to us about Freemasonry and its connections with the French resistance. And he's going to relay a first-hand tale of a brother who was involved, who emigrated to the US after the war. I've heard the presentation, Brian, and I'm sure you will all very much enjoy it. So please be with us next Tuesday, same time, same place, Brian. And the following week, we will welcome back Mark Smith for his second part of his Victoria Cross presentation, Hearts of Oak. And again, if you saw Mark on Antiques Roadshow at the weekend, he always does the craft proud when he talks about his militaria. Brian, at this time, please feel free to unmute and say your congratulations and your good to Iain and your good nights to each and every one of you. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Iain. Good night.
Yes, thank you, Iain. Excellent.
Well done, Iain. Very enjoyable. As usual, very enjoyable. And good night, brother. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, guys.
Thanks.
Iain, thank you for all your hard work and for a most enjoyable lecture.
Presentation. Good night, brethren.
Thank you, Brother Iain. Lovely lecture. Great lecture. Thank you. Thank you, Gordon. Excellent presentation, Iain. Thank you very much. Most enjoyable.
Thank you, Iain. Very educational and enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you,
night, brethren.
Presentation.
Thanks again, Brother Iain.
Very much.
Excellent, as usual. Another well-researched paper. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done, Brother Iain. First class lecture.
Thank you.
Well done, Brother Iain. Thanks very much for that very interesting lecture. Take care, brethren. Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks.
Take care, Gordon.
I'll give you 5, Brian.
Well done, Iain. You never let us down. Well done.
Well done, Iain. Excellent lecture.
Yeah, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers, Archie.
Outstanding, Iain. Thank you, Gordon.
And 4, Brian. Thanks,
big 4 before making get set.
Cheers, Gordon. Thanks,
Here we
Iain.
go.
And 3, Brian.
Cheers, Gordon.
Take
Thanks for
care.
arranging it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Iain. Thank you, Gordon.
And 2, Brian.
Thank you, Iain. It was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
And 1. Thank you so much, Brother Iain McIntosh, on behalf of everyone here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi. Good
Thank
evening,
you.
Brian.